千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
Previously, we went through the chapter from beginning to end at the just reading it from line to line, and I pointed out a few things. I pointed out the repeating characters that we could use to discern the structure in the original ancient Chinese. I'm not aware of anyone anywhere who's doing the same thing with this ancient text. Certainly, of all the books available in the Western world, in the English-speaking North American culture, the European culture, etc., there's no attempt to get anywhere near this level of detail. So what we did previously was I pointed out repeating characters. As you can see, these two characters in line 1 are repeated in the first two characters of line 3. So that was an example of repeating characters that was a little harder to see because they're in different positions. But then if you look at lines 5 and 6, you see the repeating characters that appear in the same position. So what I said before holds very true. You don't really need to know Chinese. You can visually, graphically, pictorially see for yourself that the characters are the same from one line to the next. So in a real way, we are actually working with the ancient Chinese text. So from 8 down to 11, we saw additional repeating characters. These characters are the either or. So the either or will appear in the English translation, as you can see on the right-hand side. Lastly, from 13 down to 15, you see the first character is the same. And that character maps to eliminates. And I'll talk about the meaning of those lines when we get to that point. And even more importantly, I want to talk about how the end of a chapter always wraps back and reconnects to the beginning. Again, this is something that's usually not talked about, but it's quite real, and people that have a complete, thorough understanding of the Tao Te Ching can see that as clear as daylight. So where did we leave off? Line 4. So prior to that, we talked about the world being a sacred instrument. You may recall that we zeroed in on line 3 and we pointed to the third and last characters there. Respectively, those characters mean divine or sacred, instrument or tool or container. So putting the two together, you have a range of possible translations that are all acceptable. I've chosen sacred instrument. If you want divine tool, divine container, etc., those will be fine. So the main point previously was that whenever Lao Tzu talks about the world overall, there's always going to be a number of different contexts. There's the world at the national, or back in his days, the level of the kingdoms, the national level, the state level. There's also the world in terms of nature. So what we would call, Mother Earth, great nature itself. Then we would also want to look at the world in terms of your world, my world, the world in which we inhabit in terms of the life that we live. So one major point that I made last time was that your travels through your life is your journey through your world. Your world is not exactly the world of nature overall, or the world meaning the collection of all the nations out there. No. When I say your world, your life, I'm talking about your corner of the universe, the social circles, the workplace, the people you know, the people you come across every day. That's your world. Your journey through your world, keep in mind that the world is a sacred instrument. So your journey through that world of yours is a sacred journey. So that's a main point from last time. Your journey through life, a sacred journey. So we went through this slide before, so I'm just showing this again for the purpose of recap. So remember, for this life journey that is your own sacred journey, we have a number of different metaphors that we can use. The vehicle, if you think in terms of a road trip, the vehicle for the road trip, when you map that to your life journey, it's basically your physical body. Just as you want to keep your vehicle for the road trip in good repair, you want to keep the body that you inhabit in good health. So I hope that makes sense. On a road trip, you're going to need to know which way to go. So it used to be that we would consult maps. Nowadays, everyone is basically firing up the GPS navigation functionality. It may even be built into the car. That's navigation. The equivalence in your life journey is that when we study the Tao, it's like studying a map about life, a map about this sacred instrument called the world. Specifically, the world of human interactions. So, the Tao can serve as the navigation aid, the GPS, if you will, for us to navigate through life, the road trip called life. Lastly, the last bullet point there, also important, is that your reaction to external conditions that maps to your management of internal mental states. When I say external conditions in the context of a road trip, that would be like the weather, traffic on the road, accidents, constructions, detours, all that good stuff. Mapping that to the journey of life, yeah, we also have different kinds of weather in the journey of life, don't we? We have good weather sometimes, other times we are working our way through a storm, a metaphorical storm, difficult times, times of friction, contention, anxiety, etc. So our management of internal mental states, that would be our reaction to the things that are happening to us in the external world. Some of which, like the weather, we don't really have any control over that, but we always have perfect control over our internal mental states to be able to react to it and assign meaning to it. So the suggestion from the Tao Te Ching is to pick and choose the perspective of the meaning that is the most empowering. There's more to that in just a moment. So we went through this last time, and let's go into a new slide. So beyond the first 4 lines, let's now take a look at line 5. The one who controls it will fail. So previously, we did already talk about how when you attempt to control the world, you will fail, you will lose it. And when we talk in terms of the context of the world, in terms of nature itself, attempting to exploit and manipulate nature that too leads to failure and loss. We've already seen plenty of examples of that. Human beings messing with Mother Nature has resulted in a variety of negative outcomes for us. We have caused environmental damage. That we cannot deny. So here, one focus that I'm going to ask everyone to pay attention to is that, yeah, one who controls it will fail. The one who tries to dominate, control, interfere, meddle with the world, that person will fail. And the one who grasps, with a death grip, that person will lose it. But it's always important in the Tao to apply everything that Lao Tzu talks about to your life, my life, our lives. So line 5, here's what I would suggest. This is an important point that I would suggest. Other than noting the failure of those who try to control and dominate, our main task is to make sure we ourselves do not fall into that category. Of course, I know that everyone's reaction is likely going to be, well, I'm not interested in controlling or grasping anything, so I should be okay, right? Maybe. Sometimes the Tao is easier to talk about than to do. So that is the reason why I want to draw everyone's attention to a number of questions just to kind of review and make sure. Have you ever found yourself being too much of a perfectionist or control freak? So, confession time. I have. There has been a time in my life when I often found myself being too much of a perfectionist or control freak. So even nowadays, I can see the tendency popping up every now and then. It is something that I need to be observant of and watch out for. If you do find yourself being too much of a perfectionist or control freak, you fall right back into the first category that we were talking about. Those who attempt to dominate and control, they will fail. So you don't want to set yourself up for failure. Therefore, you want to watch your own tendency to be too controlling. So that's one. How about another one? Have you ever felt an irresistible impulse to meddle or interfere with other people's business? Again, confession time, I definitely have. Now, it is important for us to make it clear that if you are a parent or a teacher, you do have an obligation, not an impulse, not temptation, but a duty and an obligation to guide, to nurture and guide your kids or your students. So that would actually not be meddling or interfering. There is, of course, a moderation that applies there as well. As with anything, you can go overboard. So here, this particular bullet point is specifically addressed to your interaction with your peers, other functioning adults, other individuals who have a right to make up their own mind, conduct their own business in peace. Occasionally, I know before, I used to sometimes want to meddle or interfere with somebody else's business. I have to, again, watch that tendency. When it comes up, I have to recognize it. Recognizing it, it will vanish into thin air. If I give into it, I know that it will lead me to failure and loss as well. Specifically, it will lead to the failure of personal connection with someone else. Nobody likes being at the receiving end of interference, especially from a control freak. and you will damage your personal relationship because of it. And one last bullet point. This is a suggestion. When you do feel those thoughts manifesting in your mind, thoughts about being too much of a perfectionist or control freak, or Mr. or Ms. Busybody, getting into everybody else's business. In such moments, I want to suggest that you recall to mind you can enjoy your journey. Specifically, I mean your sacred journey, your life journey. You can enjoy your journey more, just like any other journey, just like any other physical journey, like a road trip. You can enjoy your journey more by not trying to force your will on everything and everyone. So this same idea, I will probably reiterate one more time, but in different ways, from a different angle, in different words, just so you know. I do that because that is what Lao Tzu does as well. So if you look at lines 5 and 6, structurally, they're similar. Therefore, the translation is also similar. Lao Tzu is also trying to convey the same idea, the same concept, using different words in different ways. And my friend Barry is quite correct. There's a thin line between help and interfere, between being helpful and doing too much. So let's talk about grasping. In this context, it's all about holding on to attachments with a death grip. So this happens when there are certain things you simply cannot let go, but you ought to let go. There are certain things that you cannot let go that you should be holding on to, such as cherished friends, close relationship with family members, the love of your life. You're definitely holding on to those. Those are the attachments that you need. On the other hand, there are attachments that you don't need, but nevertheless may be tempted to hang on to with a death grip, as I say here. So this line 6, is basically saying the more you do that, the more you will lose, the greater your loss is going to be. Therefore, and here comes the practical suggestions. This is from my interpretation of what Lao Tzu is trying to get at. I have 2 suggestions for everyone. Number 1, I suggest that everybody relax. So as you can see here, I want to encourage you to think of your journey as a sightseeing tour rather than a race. Think about the objective of a race. The idea is to get to the end of the race, the finish line, as quickly as possible, ahead of everyone else. That's a race. Well, wait a minute. In the life journey, the finish line is the end of this lifetime. I'm going to suggest to everyone that you don't want to be in too much of a hurry to get there. You don't actually win a prize if you get there before all of your peers. So relax. Your journey, not a race. It's a sightseeing tour. So you're here not to hit the finish line early, but you are here for the beautiful scenery and the new experiences. You don't want to reach the finish line ahead of others. That's not the goal. That's not really the game. The name of the game is to look around, explore, learn, discover. So let's all relax. This is very similar to the discussion that we had about how sages, when they are on a road trip, when they're on a journey themselves, they are never too far away from the heavy supplies. So if you are carrying the heavy supplies, i.e. the basics or the essentials of life, then you already know that it's not a race. Second suggestion, let it be. Yeah, closely related to, hey guys, let's all relax. Let's specifically let it be, meaning to accept things as they are. You can rail against the way things are today, and you can do that all day long without changing any aspect of it. The way things are today is a result of how things have been in the past. Unfortunately, none of us can go back in time to the past to make a change, to change the present. You can do that in a movie called Back to the Future. You cannot do that in real life. Your life, sadly, is not a Hollywood script. It's not a Hollywood action comedy movie. So there's no point in railing against reality in the here and now. So further, I suggest that if you had trouble with this concept, what I mean is, you should relax and let it be, but you have trouble actually remembering to relax and letting it be. Any trouble with this, I suggest a visual image as a reminder for yourself. So let it be. Any idea what that visual reminder could be? When I say let it be, probably for some of you, I'm already conjuring an image in your mind. I know it's certainly conjuring an image in my mind. May not be the same image as for you. If you can think of something, when I say let it be, please go ahead and type it out in the Q&A section of the webinar. And if it happens to be the same as what I'm going to show you next, then that will be another sign of synchronicity that we're on the right path. So here's the image that I would suggest. An image that I hope that everyone knows. And the reason why I picked this image is because it isn't just this iconic image of the Beatles. It is also sound, isn't it? It's also audio, not just visual. It is music that you can instantly recall to mind. As I am talking about it now, I bet everyone has the melody already that you can hear in your mind. If so, that's great. That's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. It's an easy way. It's a mental shortcut. It's a shorthand mentally to help us remember so that we can recall it to mind just when we need it the most. And if you can start to remember a lot of the lyrics, that's fine too. There's a lot of cool stuff to reflect upon in the lyrics. Okay, let's move on from here. Let's keep going. Now, what we just did from lines 1 to 6 was that was the beginning section. As I noted previously in the sectional analysis, lines 1 to 6 were divided up into 3 sets of 2 lines each. Each collection of 2 lines is a couplet. So we've done section 1, we're now getting into section 2. Section 2 begins with line 7 that says, because all things. The purpose of that is to point out, for Laozi, is to point out that there's a great profusion of diversity that exists in the world. And when I say world, I hope by now your mind has been trained by the talks that we've had to automatically expand upon the word world, so that simultaneously you get the multiple context. You get that it's about the world overall in terms of political entities like countries, nations, states, kingdoms. And you also know at the same time, the world applies to nature itself, the environment. Then you also at the same time, and most importantly, know to apply the world to your world, the sacred world in which your sacred journey takes place. So the world applies to all that, and the great profusion of diversity also applies to each and every single one of the contexts that I just mentioned. So let's move on. I want to talk about line 8. Either lead or follow. And I have an example there that I would like to share with everyone. So either lead or follow. So there's a very specific way that Lao Tzu is trying to convey his points. He's trying to talk about the way it is in nature, all the living creatures that we find in nature, the way that we observe their actions, their behaviors, how they go about living their own lives. And then Lao Tzu is trying to draw a line from there to your world and my world, the human society. And by realizing this crucial key, you can integrate the first section with the current section, section 2, and the final section, the concluding section. So it can be a little bit difficult to follow because of the depth of Lao Tzu's understanding. But let me guide you step by step. So first, let's stick to nature. Let's stick to what we see in the natural world. So when living things venture anywhere, and it doesn't matter what that living thing is, all living creatures, whenever you see two or more of them go anywhere, they lead the way or follow behind. So the order that this occurs is natural. It's not forced. If you have a horde of animals going someplace, there's definitely going to be one of the animals in the lead, and then there's going to be those who pull up the rear. That's just the way it is. That's the Tao. That's how it has always been in nature. So let me ask everyone this question, and I want to pause for a moment to get everyone's take on this. So remember I said that Lao Tzu is looking at the natural world, the world of animals, living things, and then drawing a line from there into the human world. So let me ask you about how this can apply to humans. In the human world, what about leading and following? What about you in your life, leading and following? How would this apply? Pausing for a moment. And okay, excellent. I want to remind everyone that when you have spent enough time in this particular meeting, the Tao meeting, you automatically know that there are so many instances in the Tao where when I ask a question about is it A or B, that everyone will be trained to automatically think, well, does it really have to be exclusionary, A or B? In the real world, it is oftentimes both or neither. So we want to take that into account. You want to see that human beings can transcend the level of animals, that we have something extra going for us, not just what animals do instinctively. The way it is with human beings is the following. You and I, everybody we know, we all play roles in leading as well as following. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. When you have a family and kids, even when you don't think of yourself as in the lead, you are. You cannot help but to be in a leading position when it comes to your children. But it's the same with your peers as well. Sometimes you know more about something and therefore you lead. Sometimes other people know more and therefore you follow. So we play both roles. We lead and we also follow. And as my friend Suzanne points out, leading or following might change with the situation. Oh, absolutely. Yep. So I have a story that I want to share with you. It's about how we can change our perspective, especially when it comes to leading and following. We can use the Tao to help us select a perspective that is the empowering perspective. So let me share that story with you. Story called Traffic Lights. So as many of you know, a lot of times I like to tell stories from ancient traditions. Sometimes it is Chinese culture where I draw the story from. Sometimes it may be, for instance, a Zen Buddhist tradition where I draw the story from. Other times it may be the Tao tradition, like Zhuangzi has many great stories. This particular story is actually a true story. It happened in real life, and it's a story from the Yiguan Tao tradition in Taiwan. So in Yiguan Tao, there are levels of people who are responsible for teaching the Tao or leading in terms of Tao cultivation. The position may or may not correspond to the level of understanding in that person, but overall, everyone tries to share whatever wisdom they have realized, because sharing is caring, and the more you share the Tao, the more powerful the Tao becomes in a group. So in a Tao community, you're going to have lecturers, people who oftentimes will talk about a particular topic of the Tao. You have the ordained masters of Yiguan Tao, the Dianchuan Shi, and you also have the grandmasters, those who are at a higher, more senior level. So this is a true story about one such grandmaster of that tradition. This grandmaster was well known as a wise practitioner of the Tao. And because of that, many Tao communities and temples frequently invite him to speak. So he was more than glad to share the Tao with everyone, with as many people as he could. So he wanted to visit as many of these Tao communities and temples that have invited him as possible. But he was quite elderly. He was getting up there in age, so he needed help with transportation. So a follower of the Tao, a practitioner of the Tao, stepped up he stepped forward and he volunteered to be the Grandmaster's driver. He considered this to be a great honor, to be able to drive the Grandmaster to different appointments, to different speaking engagements. And at the same time, he also felt this would be an opportunity for him to interact more with such a wise master of the Tao, to be able to learn from that interaction, to learn more, absorb more of his great wisdom. So one day, as usual, he was driving, taking the Grandmaster to yet another location to give yet another talk about the Tao. This time, he was driving through heavy traffic, and the driver was getting increasingly agitated by all the bad drivers on the road, the bad drivers around him. I'm sure you and I can relate to that. As we drive, we oftentimes encounter similar situations. While he was getting agitated, the Grandmaster sat in the back, perfectly at ease. So the driver saw up ahead that the traffic light was about to change from green to yellow. So naturally, he knew that he only had a small window of opportunity to get past the intersection. So he stepped on the gas to zoom through. Unfortunately, he immediately had to slow down because the car in front of him was not going very fast. By the time he reached the intersection itself, the light had already turned from yellow to red, and the car in front of him went slowly past the intersection, and traffic from the other directions resumed. He slammed on his brake, stopped at the red light. He cursed loudly, hit the steering wheel to vent his frustration. Does that sound familiar? Have you done something similar? I have. But then the driver realized, he remembered that the Grandmaster was right behind him. And he had promised himself that when he was spending time with the Grandmaster, he would be on his best behavior. So he was kind of letting himself down here. He felt greatly embarrassed. So he apologized. He said, "Sorry, Master. I was just a little upset that I wasn't able to get across the intersection before the light turned red." The Grandmaster asked him, "Why would that be a cause for feeling upset?" The driver said, "Well, unfortunately, I was just a tad too slow. And because of that, now we're stuck. We're stuck here, having to wait for the light to change again. I don't like falling behind, that's all." The Grandmaster said, "Think of it this way. When the light turns green, you will be the first to cross the intersection. Out of all the cars on this side of the red light, you will be in the lead and not behind anyone." The driver thought about it and had to admit such an idea had never occurred to him before. The Grandmaster continued, "Had you succeeded in beating the red light as you wished, your situation would actually be the opposite. You would, of course, be the last car in the previous group of cars, trailing everyone and driving through their exhaust fumes, right?" The driver nodded. The Grandmaster was only stating facts and presenting a different perspective on them. Somehow, the driver's agitation and frustration disappeared into thin air. So I'll be the first. So there you have it, a true story from that particular grandmaster noticed that nothing at all has changed about the driver's situation. But just by looking at it differently, skillfully choosing the perspective that is empowering rather than frustrating, the grandmaster demonstrated how easily you can master your internal emotional states. Now, what the grandmaster said applies to the journey of life as well. So remember, this line of the Tao Te Ching is talking about all things lead or follow. So in that same way, you can see yourself as being behind a group of people, and you can think of that group of people as teachers to learn from, so the people that you follow in the journey of life. You can also see yourself in a leading position of another group, those who can follow you and learn from you. So the reality, the truth, is that you are not one or the other. You are always both. Can everyone see that? So this has an important bearing upon a point that Lao Tzu will get to toward the end of this chapter. So please keep it in mind. And you may even want to extend a little bit from this point and be even more accurate. The most accurate statement that you can make about your position in the journey of life is that you, I'm addressing you directly, I'm addressing the true self, talking about you. You occupy all possible positions all the time in the journey of life. First, last, and everything in between. You are always leading some people, you are always following some people, and you are always somewhere in between. So that is the key realization behind this particular story. To give everyone a quick preview of what this means toward the end is that when you see yourself in that way from the perspective of the Tao that incorporates all possible angles, all possible perspectives, there is a magic that happens in that you notice that you cannot be as arrogant as you could possibly be before without that realization. When you see yourself as being always above other people, naturally that will lead to arrogance. But if you see yourself in that accurate view, somewhere along the great sacred divine journey of life, the arrogance goes away. So we'll come back to that. For now though, let's do a little bit more in this section, in the same section. Line 9, either blow hot or cold. So let's tackle this in a similar way. The methodology you can tell in this particular section is that we observe and conclude about the natural world. Then we apply the same understanding to the human world, or I should say, human society. So that is the methodology. Keep that in mind. Let's begin with the myriad things, the living creatures. So here's something that we know. Some creatures are warm-blooded, mammals, and some are not. Serpents, snakes, lizards, etc. So we know that some animals tend toward the warmth, others not so much, the cold-blooded ones. Either way, they're all living things. Then what you want to do is that you want to immediately think about how it is for human beings and extend beyond that. Now, the superficial way to approach the Tao Te Ching is to say that, well, human beings, we're mammals, so we're warm-blooded too. So we're on one side of it. Yeah, okay, that's true. In terms of basic biology, you're absolutely correct. But we're talking about the Tao now, not biology. So we look at the whole thing. We look at the whole picture. We look at reality of existence itself. So here's what's going on. Human beings have more complexities than animals. Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that you do that animals would have no idea what you're up to. So you're much more complex as an entity than animals. So think about some of the interesting things we do. Talk about blow hot or cold. Let's first talk about blowing cold. Well, what is that? For instance, with very hot soup, we blow on it to cool it down. Same with food, food that's coming out of the microwave, that's too hot, you nuked it for too long, and it's too hot for consumption. You're going to want to breathe on it. You're going to want to blow air on it to cool it down. We've all done that. You've done it. I've done it. You've seen people do it. This is not news. So, question, for human beings, is it always like that? Is it always like sort of a Superman with his super breath that can freeze people solid? Of course, you and I can't do that. We don't have super breath like Superman. So we can breathe on something and freeze it the way that Superman can in comics. Well, real life example in the other direction is that when it's very cold, what do? We are rubbing our hands together, we're breathing onto it, we're blowing hot air onto it to keep our hands warm. So I hope you begin to see the parallel between this and the previous line. In the previous line, I said, well, human beings, we transcend the level of myriad things. Animals either lead or follow. Human beings, we do both. We do everything. We're leading and following and somewhere in between all at the same time. Here, you see another example where human beings can blow hot and cold. That's true in terms of our personal interactions with other people as well. So there used to be a song from the 80s, Paula Abdul, Cold-Hearted Snake, that kind of reminds me, in social situations, we can be warm or cold-blooded, not literally, metaphorically. We can approach other people with a lot of warmth or give them the cold shoulders. We can be warm-hearted or cold-hearted, or, as Paula Abdul was saying, be the cold-hearted snake. So, another example of how human beings can transcend all that. Now, one more, and I think that'll really drive home the point. And what I want to do is to take line 10 and line 11, talk about strength, weakness, take ownership, have ownership, or take by force, take ownership by force. Here, once we have talked about the previous two lines, I'm pretty sure everybody has gotten the idea of how to apply the Tao in multiple levels, from the natural world to human society. That's great. Now we want to take a step back mentally, look at lines 10 and 11, and then think about the meaning that Lao Tzu is attempting to convey here. What is he saying about strength and weakness, ownership, take by force, etc.? Well, the important thing is this. The important thing with these lines is to take a step back mentally, look at the overall message, and you want to first apply that to nature. So you want to note the bewildering varieties and diversity in nature. Animals, plants, insects, all unique and different. Some have strength, some have weakness, some have ownership of an ecological niche, say, or take by force. So you can already see how that applies in the human world by extension. But let's hold off on that for just a moment. Stick with the animal world for now. So with animals, with the natural world, we know that all those living things play different roles. Perhaps predators, prey, scavengers, and so on. Bees pollinating plants, etc. We know the working of nature, different roles that all these different entities have to play in an overall ecology. That's number one. Number two is different capabilities. That is, some animals are strong and rely on strength. Some are fast, they rely on speed. Others, not necessarily strong, but perhaps can rely on stealth. Some have a natural camouflage. So just a bewildering array of diversity out in nature. Now, the challenge is to apply that. See how the above manifests among humans, just like what we have already done with the previous two lines. We talked about blowing hot and cold. We talked about leading and following. We bring it to the human world, and we see that humans can inhabit multiple roles, multiple capabilities, and shift back and forth. So I want to challenge everyone to think about how everything that you see in this slide can apply to the human world. And beyond all this, there are important points that Lao Tzu wants to make. So let me leave this up on the screen. Have everyone think about this. When we come back, we will finish this particular section about the myriad things, and we'll get to the main message from Lao Tzu for this particular chapter, the point he wants to make. That is based on understanding of how the world functions, the animal world and the human world. So to pick up where we left off, we were talking about how in the natural world, all the living things have different roles and they have different capabilities. So the question for everyone is, how does this concept, how would these characteristics about the natural world map to human society? So here's the answer that I'm going to suggest for everyone. First, I want to just talk about, I want to build it up first from evolution, and then we talk about how social interaction works for all of us. So sticking to just biology, the evolutionary process, are human beings hunters, predator, prey, scavenger? Well, we started out millions of years ago not as mighty hunters, I'm afraid to say. So the earliest humans were rather helpless. Mostly we were prey and scavengers. This is the earliest ancestors of modern humans, millions of years ago. Now, we were prey and scavengers mostly because there was no way that we could compete against animals physically. We know that human beings are not particularly fast or strong. Many animals can outrun us quite easily. And many animals are much stronger than we are. They have that brute animal strength. So we're no match to them. If it's a bear, a lion, a tiger, a human being unarmed doesn't really have a chance. So that's how it was in the beginning. We had those specific roles to play, prey and scavenger. But as time went on, the human mind, the most powerful weapon that human beings possess, the human mind, human intelligence, awareness, it developed, became refined, it proliferated, and eventually prevailed over all myriad things. The intelligence of human beings was the single factor that allowed human beings to have dominion over the natural world, to dominate and control. Of course, in the beginning of this chapter, we've spoken about how domination and controlling will tend to get negative results. And we have definitely seen that in the human exploitation of the animal world, of the natural world. So there's a little bit more. So because intelligence is so incredibly powerful, we now, since the invention of tools, civilization, animal husbandry, farming, etc., human beings became the ultimate predator, ended up at the top of the food chain. Not too bad for a species that is not particularly strong physically or fast in terms of the ability to move themselves or anything. The only thing we had going for us was the mind. Okay, so that's the evolutionary perspective. Question, how about human society? To what extent does this concept for us human beings, that's what I mean, to what extent does it mirror the environment or nature itself? We know how it is in the environment, we know how it is in nature, we know how it is in evolution. So what about human society? That's next. So stick with me for just a moment. I'll be making important points. So hang in there. So in human society, so point number one, think about the people in your world, my world, everyone's world. The people in your world are just as diverse as the creatures out in nature. They play just as many different roles. So in a way, your world becomes like an ecology of sorts, an ecology of human interactions. So far, so good? Let's continue. Just like how it was before, when we looked into humans leading and following, when we looked at blowing hot and cold, well, the roles that people have in human society, you know and I know that these roles are constantly shifting. So as you can see in this bullet point, I have some examples here. The giver today may become the taker tomorrow. The beneficiary may become the benefactor. So by beneficiary, I mean the person who receives a benefit. By benefactor, I mean the person who gives a benefit. The students may become the teacher, and so on. And the constant shifting can occur within a very short amount of time. So here's what we here's what we can notice. It's just like how we exploit and then damage the environment. We can be doing the same thing in our human ecology as well, in the human environment, human society. What I mean is, if you fail to follow the Tao, you can cause damage to your relationships, and the result can be catastrophic and unpredictable. So in that way, not that different from the consequences of ecological damage. Sometimes the negative repercussions seems to come out of left field. We did not understand because we did not know where it came from, because we didn't understand the impact or the interconnectedness of the different entities that form the balance of ecology. So because of that, because of this very important factor, there are specific things that sages will learn from all of this, everything that we have talked about, everything that goes from the animal kingdom to the human world, all the conclusions that we have. Sages look at this and they definitely have figured out a few things. Let's take a look at what they have learned. So, sages observed the nature and reflected upon humanity. They saw the similarities between human society and nature, and they also noticed how things can change among humans, sometimes very quickly. So let's use a couple of examples to make this really clear. So look at the last bullet here. A person can go from rags to riches, or the other way around. We know that this is true because we do see this all the time. So the other way around, the opposite of rags to riches would be the way that I describe it here, is that you can change from being the mighty king of the jungle, not literally, figuratively. You can go from that to a little mouse running around fearing for its life. So in the natural world, among myriad things, these roles are pretty much all set. A little mouse in the natural world is gonna be a scavenger, and that's it. A lion, tiger can be on top of the food chain, and there it will stay in that role. Human beings, just like what we have already talked about, can shift back and forth, can change. Pardon me. This has important implications that we're going to explore right now. Because things can change so quickly for us human beings. Let's go to the next slide. We have a saying in the West. This is not like an ancient Chinese saying, fortune cookie wisdom. No, this is something that we talk about right here in the West. We say that, hey, everybody, you should be nice to the people you come across on your way up, because you will see all of them again on your way down. Has anyone heard of this before? Probably quite a few of you have heard of this before. And this is quite true. You are, going up in the world, and at some point you may be coming back down. So it's a good idea to be kind, to be polite, to be courteous to everybody. You never know when you will encounter them again. And hopefully, on your way down, there's not going to be a whole lot of people who will, give you like an extra kick to speed up your progress. So that's what we say in the West. What about the Eastern sages, the Eastern mystics? What about the Tao sages? Well, the Tao sages would say it in a different way. They would say, you should follow the Tao and practice moderation. So when things are going well for you, quite possibly as a side effect of following the Tao, You avoid the extremes that may bring about your downfall. That makes sense. And I think you can tell that I've lined up east and west, west first and then east, because these are different ways of talking about the same thing. And the bottom bullet here comes from an observation about the natural world and the human world, how there's similarities, but then also different. Because, wow, in our world, it can change so incredibly quickly. So as you live your life, as you travel your sacred journey, you're definitely going to want to practice moderation. You're definitely going to want to avoid extremes so that you can avoid negativity that may bring about your downfall. And if the winds of fortune shift and not in your favor, then you will be able to recover from that much more easily than otherwise. If you practice the moderation and not go into extremes, you will have a much easier time riding out the setbacks. So let's get specific on that and then use a bunch of examples to explain. First, I want everyone to note that 13, 14, 15, we're now heading toward the very end of this chapter. This is not a long chapter, so I completely expect that we will be able to finish explaining every single line and then do a paraphrase to really completely get everything we can out of this chapter. So what I want to do is to look at 13, 14, 15. You already know, I pointed out that the first character from these lines, 去, means eliminates. So you already know it means eliminate X, eliminate Y, eliminate Z. So now we're going to talk about the X, Y, Z and be very specific on that. So starting with line 13, eliminates extremes. Sage eliminates extremes. So let's talk about this. Extremes, exactly what are the extremes we're talking about here? So specifically, extremes in this context is about being over the top, doing too much, and feeling too much of emotional extremes. Whether it's extreme happiness, sadness, or anger, anything that verges on the extremes is simply not great for you. So, as you would probably expect, and I would as well, sages wish to eliminate this particular tendency in themselves because it is contrary to the Tao. So the Tao is about understated elegance, it's about peaceful tranquility, it's also about doing just the right amount instead of doing too much. The negative consequence of doing too much is that you run yourself ragged, you exhaust yourself, and usually for no great reason, for no great results. So number one, eliminate extremes in terms of doing too much, in terms of emotional extremes. Okay, what about the second one? Eliminates excess. So excess is in the sense of being wasteful, having too much, and discarding too much, being recklessly extravagant, senselessly discarding valuable resources. So in the Tao, resources are tied to the sacred instrument that is the world, the divine instrument that is the world. So the resources that come into your life, whatever form they may take, they are sacred too. And that is the reason why they should not be wasted. So, two important points. Number one, sages eliminate this tendency, the tendency for excess. This specifically means the tendency to be excessive, excessively wasteful. Sages eliminate this tendency because it is also contrary to the Tao. And the Tao is about cherishing, conserving, and sharing resources. When someone becomes extremely wealthy, wealth, prosperity, and abundance only meaningful if they can be leveraged for the greater good. So what is the use, for instance, of someone becoming very wise and proficient in the Tao if they cannot share that abundance of wisdom with other people? So please note that in this context, moderation applies as well. So what I mean is there's a skillful balance. So you conserve your resources, but you also avoid hoarding and holding onto way too much useless clutter. So moderation is the name of the game. The avoidance of extremes is the goal. And so far, we have looked at two different kinds of extremes. We have the extremes in terms of action, in terms of emotional extremes, and now in line 14, we also have extremes in being extremely wasteful, extremely excessive. So to illustrate that, I would like to offer for your consideration another story from ancient Chinese tradition. It's a story that I call The Beggar and the Old Monk. So the story goes like this. Once upon a time in ancient China, there was a man who had inherited great wealth. He lived in a huge mansion, and he was attended to by many servants. Also, he had many friends, and he loved to hold banquets for all his friends. Together, they would eat and drink and be merry well into the evening. Most nights, he and his friends would drink so much wine, that much of the food would be left untouched. The next morning, he would order his servants to dump the leftovers in a nearby river. And as his servants were busy doing that, following his orders, this rich man, in his mind, he was already planning the next banquet. And the next banquet will be even more extravagant. Now, the big problem he didn't realize he had was that he came into this great wealth, but he had no experience actually creating any wealth. So he spent lavishly, and his wealth dwindled day by day. There was nothing that he did that could add to it or to replenish it. So one day, he was startled to realize that he had no more money left, no more money for any more banquets. Indeed, no more money for anything. His friends stopped coming. So he went out to visit them instead. He had treated them so well in the past, the endless banquets. He was pretty sure that they should now be able to help him. They should be able to lend him some money, right? To help him get past the rough patch. So guys, what do you think his success rate was with his friends? Do you think that he was likely going to be able to get his friends to lend him money? Would they help him because he treated them so well in the past? Well, that was sadly not the case. All of his friends avoided him. even the ones who drank his wine with him and said they would always be his best, dearest, and closest friends forever. Even those avoided him like the plague. He came back from visiting his friends to find that his mansion was deserted and empty. The servants had left while he was away. He hadn't paid any of them in quite some time, so they took with them whatever valuables they could get their hands on. Yeah, even the ones who had sworn to him that they would always be his most loyal servants forever. Later, he hit rock bottom when he had to sell the mansion to pay back ruthless loan sharks. He lost everything and he became a beggar. As a beggar, he would often go hungry. He didn't have much luck with the passerbys on the streets. So he tried to change his luck by going to a different part of town. But still, no one took pity on him. One day, he was especially hungry. No one had given him any money or food for quite some time, for several days. Just when he was about to give up, an old Buddhist monk saw him and noticed how weak he was from hunger. So the old monk, out of compassion, brought him back to the temple, to the Buddhist temple, and fed him a bowl of steaming rice porridge. The beggar ate in gratitude. He could not believe how delicious it was. So after the beggar regained some of his strength, he thanked the old monk for this kindness. The old monk, in turn, asked him how he came to such a low point in his life. The beggar said, "Me? Oh, I wasn't always like this." The beggar said, "I used to enjoy nothing but the best in life. The best food, the best wine, the best rice." A sudden thought occurred to him. The beggar said, actually, now that I think of it, this is a little strange. The rice I just ate, the rice I just had was top quality. It's the same kind of rice I used to eat every day, so I know it's much more expensive than what most people can get. You're only an old monk. How are you able to afford this? The old monk said, "Well, I can show you. Follow me." The old monk took the beggar to a storage room in the back of the temple. In that room, there were many large urns, each filled to the brim with rice. The old monk explained, "Years ago, I saw that a wealthy man up the river was ordering his servants to dump the leftover food in the river. So I ordered the younger monks in this temple to go into the shallows of the river with buckets to retrieve as much of the rice as possible. As you can see, we ended up with a lot." The beggar was stunned. He was not expecting this at all. The old monk continued, "We cleaned the rice carefully, we washed it, and then we laid them out in the sun until they were completely dried. Then we stored them in these large urns you see right in front of you. There is enough here to last us for years. The dumping of the food stopped some time ago, and the wealthy man is gone. We have no idea what happened to him." In that moment, the beggar found himself face to face with his own past. He began to realize how wrong he was to be so thoughtless and wasteful. He felt great shame it was more than he could bear. The old monk saw that the beggar was on the verge of tears. What's the matter? The beggar said, that wealthy man, that was me. The end. This is one of the most frequently retold stories in the Chinese culture, and there are many variations, many versions of it. The idea is always the same, though. Karma speaks louder than words. And you can see that when the beggar was the wealthy man, he definitely did not follow the Tao of cherishing his resources. So he paid the price for that. This idea, so prevalent among the ancient, traditional, authentic Tao tradition, this idea is what I was raised with. I was, from a young age, I was trained to think in this specific way, to never waste anything. So habitually, it's been deeply ingrained in me that if I'm given food, I will finish it completely. I always thought that this is normal, but then when I came to the West, I realized that not everyone thought the same. And today, East or West, I see that people definitely do not follow the Tao that I was raised with. So let me explain the perspectives that I came across and the difference that I noticed. Number one, I came across this idea. Leaving some food unfinished in your plate is a sign of prosperity. Why? Because it shows you can afford to waste some food. So that's very different than the way that I was raised. And there's more. Another idea that I came across is that if you eat all your food, other people will think you must be desperately hungry. And number three, so there's a lot more, but I'll just highlight three, for the sake of simplicity. Don't force yourself to eat what you don't like. So when I see these ideas, I definitely appreciated where they were coming from, but they definitely were different from what I thought before. Specifically, what I was thinking was, as I said, to cherish, conserve, and share resources. That includes food. And by cherishing, conserving, and sharing resources, it leads to the cultivation of contentment and gratitude. And in a moment, I'll show you how that looks in Chinese culture. Lastly, to the people who say, don't force yourself to eat what you don't like, well, I was trained to be very sure to get only what I like and can finish, so that I will finish what I get. Now, there's a lot more to this topic. I will say that my wife is the exact same way. So a lot of times when we go out, when we go someplace, and we're ordering food and we're finishing everything, I definitely get looks of, I definitely get stares from the waiter who's not expecting this kind of behavior, and perhaps the waiter is thinking that I must be desperately hungry. And I do understand some people can say that obesity is epidemic, so don't force people to finish eating everything. It's bad for them. The attitude that I want to explain from the Tao tradition is that obesity is indeed a big problem, but it doesn't mean that you have to finish everything you eat exactly. What it really means is that you should take less rather than to take more than you can finish and then waste part of it. So very different ideas. So all of this plays into what I call the Tao of contentment. So let me share that with you. These are Eastern concepts that a lot of times Western audience is not exposed to. So I want to be sure to present those perspectives for your consideration. So here we have 4 characters, 惜福感恩. Let me explain what these 4 characters mean. First, I will go character by character to explain what they are literally, and then I will provide the translation. So with these 4 characters, we have the first character there, meaning to cherish. Second character, 福, means prosperity. Third character there, 感, to feel, 恩, like gratitude for saving grace. So when you put it together, it doesn't quite make an English sentence. Cherish prosperity, feel gratitude. Okay, I kind of see where you're going, but what does it mean really? What is the correct translation? What it means is that you should cherish all the good things you already possess and feel deeply grateful for having them in your life. So this leads to the Tao. Tao sages know that when this is missing, when you have no thoughts to cherish the prosperity that you already possess, the good things you already possess, you also have no gratitude for possessing them, then you never quite feel like you have enough. You feel a lack of contentment. So you are forever chasing after things. So in Buddhist teachings, this is specifically identified as a manifestation of a dukkha. It's the dukkha of not being able to get what you want. Indeed, it's an emptiness that seems to feel like you will never have enough. So dukkha becomes a form of suffering or imperfection. When you do possess this particular Tao, you naturally feel content and happy. So this is the connection between your feelings and your level of happiness that you can enjoy as you undertake this journey in your life. So for everyone, what I would suggest is that I do understand that there are always things that we're looking for, things that we want. But just having what you already have, life, friends, family, this is actually a great source of happiness as it is. You don't actually need to go somewhere to have this kind of happiness. It's actually right in front of you. It's actually something that's already within reach. You just need to appreciate, and as I say here, to cherish. Okay, we're coming up toward the very end of this particular chapter. So let's finish it off. Last line, we have a character here, Tai. So this character can be a little tricky. If you look it up in the dictionary, it would be far from clear what Lao Tzu is trying to say. So Tai by itself, in modern Mandarin, it means safe, peaceful, and tranquil. So an often used expression in modern Mandarin, 国泰, which means peace, safety, and tranquility prevail in the country, or the kingdom as the case may be in ancient times. So Tai seems like a positive term. Peace, safety, security, tranquility. So if you plug that in to line 15, it's gonna be really strange. The sage wants to eliminate safety? Is that what it's saying? Eliminate security? Eliminate peace? Tranquility? No, no, no. That's exactly opposite to what the sages are trying to do. So to understand this particular character at the last possible position in this particular chapter, you have to look at the ancient Chinese meaning, which is different from modern Mandarin. So in ancient Chinese and Tao Te Ching context, this character means extreme. Okay, well, that makes a little more sense because line 13 is about extremes. Line 14 also about extremes, being extremely excessive. So if line 15 is also about extremes, that kind of makes sense. At least they all go together. At least it makes sense that these will all be things that Lao Tzu wants to eliminate. All right, so there is a little bit more. Let me point this out. Here, in the context of chapter 29, extreme here is in terms of ego. Hence, arrogance as the manifestation of extreme ego. So just a little bit more explanation on this, and then I think we'll drive home this point. So I think it makes sense to everyone why a sage would want to eliminate arrogance. I think everyone knows that it's contrary to the Tao as well. In the Tao, it's all about being humble. So before we get to that whole idea, the Tao of humility, I want to tie this back to the beginning of the chapter, and I want to point out for everyone's attention that when you have this arrogance, I'm better than everyone, that naturally leads to the temptation to dominate and control, which is at the very beginning of this chapter. So you see that once again, when we get to the very end of this chapter, we go back to the beginning. We'll connect it back to the beginning. It's all connected together. So now we see three kinds of extremism, three kinds of extremes: doing too much, wasting too much, and having too much pride. So let me focus on this last point, having too much pride. And I want to address the Tao of humility. I want to especially address it. I feel it's important because so many people I come across in Tao cultivation are absolutely brilliant. They all understand more about life and spirituality than other people, so that it's likely that some of them will fall into the trap of arrogance. So I want to emphasize the Tao of humility as a way to prevent that. So point number one, in your life journey, you will come across people who can't really compare to you in various ways. So by this, I think I'm addressing you specifically. You have come across people who can't really compare to you in various ways. So let me outline some of the possibilities, some of the people that you may have come across. Remember, this is not abstract anymore. We're not talking about a concept or philosophy that applies to life in general or to other people. This applies to you. You may have come across people who are not as smart or as fast, as sharp, as brilliant, as strong as you are. Admit it, you have. Number two, perhaps you have come across people who, they may be smart and fast and strong, but not as educated, not as knowledgeable, not as skillful, not as proficient as you are in certain things. And possibility number three, beyond what you were born with, the smarts, maybe the athletic abilities, the talents, beyond the education and knowledge, another possibility. You may have come across people who can compare to you because they have not been as fortunate in life as you have been. What am I talking about? Background, affluence. If you come from a privileged background, you may come across people, you're likely to come across people who are not as fortunate. So out of all three, question, is the above 1, 2, and 3 justification for arrogance? Why or why not? So this is the way it always works for the Tao. We have to sieve through the question. We have to get clear on it. And that's a question for you. It's a serious question. I'm addressing you. You may have come across people who are not as smart as you, not as knowledgeable as you, etc., etc. Is that justification for arrogance? Why or why not? So to be devil's advocate, perhaps I'll say, yeah, I'm justified in being arrogant because, it's objectively true that I'm better than they are. What an insidious trap. So easy to fall into in private moments with yourself. That could be a thought that you entertain. Let me explain how it would be seen from the perspective of Lao Tzu. So in this particular chapter, we have seen Lao Tzu pointing out that in life, in the world, the myriad things, some lead and some follow. And that's what it was in the original Chinese. Some lead, some follow. You can extrapolate from there to this. In life, some are ahead and some are behind. So remember, the whole point in the story about the Grandmaster is that you are both. More than both, you are leading and following and everything in between. And what this means, the implication of this is that no matter how blessed you may be, I'm underlining the word blessed for a specific reason here. No matter how ahead of others you may be, there are many more who are more gifted than you. That is, ahead of you. I'm also underlining the word gifted for a specific reason that will become clear in the next slide. So in Chinese culture, there's a well-known saying that I would like to break down for you. 人上有人，天外有天. What is that? What does it mean? As before, let me break it down for you character by character and then explain to you what it means. So with the first 4 characters, you start with the character for person, people, human. And then the second character means up or above. Then we have the character for there is, has, have, etc. And then the last character is the same. 人, person. person above there is person. What? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's the same pattern with 天外有天. The literal transcription for that is going to be heaven or sky beyond. Why? There is heaven. Heaven beyond there is heaven. What? What does that mean? Let's take a look at the translation. Translation makes a little more sense. There are people above people, heaven beyond heaven. What does that mean? Well, it means no matter how great one may be, there are always others who are even greater. Therefore, one should always be humble. So there are people above people, meaning that there's always someone out there who can be even better at something that you are good at, just as beyond heaven, there's heaven. Beyond the Earth's atmosphere, there's outer space. Now, I encourage everyone to think about this critically and ask questions such as, hey, Derek, what about the top athletes of the world? You say that there's always someone who's better, but what if we look at the very top athletes? I'm talking Olympic gold medalists or world champions or world record holders. Are they not the very best by definition? I mean, someone's got to be number one, right? So that is a trick question for everybody. If you'd like to address that question, I would welcome you typing in your thoughts and answers. Now let me explain what it looks like from the Tao perspective. When you have clarity about the world, clarity about the situation. So the answer is that elite athletes of the world know better than anyone that their perch at the top is precarious at best, and it is always temporary. Before too long, someone else will break the record, the world record, new world record will be established, or age takes its toll, another competitor becomes the new champion or gold medalist. There is only one competitor who always wins, and that is time itself. So, Carol, you are absolutely correct. Regardless of how great you may be as a competitor, you will eventually become too old to compete. So this saying that you're looking at here, it holds true. There's always something even greater. Therefore, we should always be humble. So there's more. I'll move this to the top and then present the other ones. These are the other lines from that same section. Remember, it talks about the great diversity of all things out there, all living things, which we connect to the great diversity that we also have in human society. So here's what it means. Here's the implication. The great diversity of life means no one is the best at everything. And I can see that my friend Alyssa is already on top of this, is already understanding this. This is true among people just as it is among myriad things, and it means we all bring different gifts in order to contribute in different ways. You're never going to be able to do everything yourself. You're always going to need other people to contribute, to be on your side, to travel the journey with you and contribute with you. To make that point, I want to bring in this graphic. Jigsaw puzzles. The gifts that you possess are the puzzle pieces that you bring. You may have many pieces, meaning you are multi-talented. That's great. But even when that is the case, I can guarantee that you don't have all the pieces. You need other people to bring in their pieces as well, so you can put it all together. That's the other reason for the Tao of humility. So why am I underlining the word gifts or blessings in the previous slide? Gifted? Well, because of the last point. The gifts and blessings, well, they were given to you. Here's the point. You had nothing to do with it, starting life with more good things than others. If you are multi-talented and you ended up with more puzzle pieces, well, it wasn't something that you were in a position to demand or create for yourself before you were born. You were simply given that. Greater intelligence? Gift. More talents? Gift. Better looks? Beautiful looks? Gift. Blessings. Every single one of them. Something that was given to you. Something you never earned. Therefore, it makes far more sense to feel grateful for having received these blessings and gifts rather than arrogant. So that is the ultimate point. That is why in this chapter, Lao Tzu says to eliminate the extremes, which is not just extremes in actions and emotions, but also extremes in the way you manage your ego, to never let that ego get out of control to become arrogance. So we're now at the very end of this particular chapter. I thought that we will be able to get to the paraphrase, but it really has to wait until next time. So let me jump to the conclusion, to the summary. Here we go. There are specific things tied to what we're just talking about. If you look at the left-hand side here, this is to eliminate extremes, eliminate excess, eliminate arrogance. So the theme is the same. Indeed, the top half of the summary is the same from last time. Those who attempt to dominate and control cannot succeed because they move against the Tao, same as last time. Therefore, in our own journey through this sacred world, we must take care to, now the following parts are going to be different from last time, and it's going to correspond to everything that you see here to the left, to eliminate extremes, to eliminate excess, and eliminate arrogance. So let's go through them. Number one, eliminate extremes. Do just enough, neither too much or too little. Moderation is the key. Second one, eliminate excess, as in excessively wasteful. Cherish, conserve, and share resources. They all come from the divine instrument that is the world and should therefore never be wasted. Number three, eliminate arrogance. I encourage you to think about it carefully. What we have talked about just now, the Tao of humility, please use it to help you see through the great illusion that is arrogance. When we don't see the clarity about existence, when we don't see the puzzle pieces and our different contributions, we're likely to become arrogant. When we see the progression of the sacred journey through the sacred world, the people ahead of us, the people behind us, that will help us eliminate arrogance.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.